Welcome to the Chess Angle. For this interview episode, I spoke with Fide Master Roger LaFlair. Roger teaches high school chemistry and chess at a private school here on Long Island in New York, and also has an active roster of private chess students. Roger shared some extremely useful information for amateur players and adult improvers. That discussion is coming up. Don't go anywhere.
Thanks for having me on, Neil. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me start. You're a fellow school teacher. It's my understanding you teach chemistry and you also teach chess. And I know you believe in the importance of critical thinking. So can you tell us a little bit about, what you do exactly and how all that ties in and what your thoughts on that are?
Yeah, so I've taught chemistry for at least 15 years. And I work at a private school, so you do have to be flexible. I've taught other classes, astronomy, astrophysics. I've done algebra a couple of years and some other things. And I have taught chess. And there is a movement in the teaching pedagogy towards, critical thinking, this age of having everything on your cell phone, sort of to minimize, memorizing and more solving problems and logical, thinking. So to that end, I really like chess. It checks all those boxes. If I teach chemistry, before I start getting anything, seriously abstract or requires critical thinking, there's months of learning sort of fundamentals. I got to learn about atoms and bonding and naming and all these other things. And it's like 6 months before they really start learning or start acquiring those critical skills. So I find chess is great at any level. And when someone learns the rules, they can immediately start, using those critical thinking skills. And that's why I love it, because there's a little memorizing. There's always that in everything, but you can get them thinking and analyzing, a week after they learn. They really start analyzing at their level. It doesn't matter what level. You're analyzing and solving problems, and that's what they want students to be able to do in this new world. You have to be able to solve problems and think on your feet, be objective and analytical and all those things. And chess is great for that. So I'm glad it's at my school taught as a graded class. I fought hard. They wanted to make it pass fail. I said, no, I want it graded. I want it graded as an elective. That way the kids know they can't slack. They got to do homework. They got to function. So I did get it passed through curriculum as a graded class. And it's really enjoyable. I love teaching chess more than the other, disciplines.
That's terrific. Yeah, and I agree. It should really be mandatory in the curriculum across the country. Absolutely. For the reasons that you said.
Yeah, they don't even have to be like, some people worry about the competitive aspects, but you don't even have to be competitive. You can just put someone down and give them a problem and they'll sit and analyze for an hour, and they don't have to compete with others if they don't want to do that. Like, it doesn't force competitive situations if the student doesn't want that.
And that's so important. The critical thinking, the problem solving, and everything now is based on that project-based learning. It's definitely forward thinking, but you definitely want students to be able to think on their own and solve problems on their own. And that's ultimately the whole point of education. But like you said, when you first started, chess checks all of those boxes. Now, Roger, I know that you also teach private students. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, what your practice is like and what your approach is and the types of things you do with your private students.
Yeah, so I actually started teaching privately. When I got out of college, I had a science degree, and I was actually working at Home Depot at the time. And I got into the teaching. I was already, I was already at 2,400 senior master. Yeah, 88 or so. I got out of college, and I was working at Home Depot as a store assistant manager. And Tony Renna, another FM Long Island, his wife was going to deliver twins. And he said, look, can you help me out? I got some kids up on the North Shore. I can't tutor them. I got to take care of my wife. She's expecting. And I went and tutored these kids, and we just hit it off. And they said, look, we're keeping you and Tony Renna. And it just become a fee. I don't even have a business card. And just one after another, parents calling me. Suddenly I really didn't have time to work at Home Depot. And one of the parents was so impressed, I guess, at my whatever teaching skills at the time. She said, look, why don't you teach at one of the local schools? You're a good teacher. You relate to the kids. You have a degree in science, and they need. So that was sort of my angle to get into teaching at the high school level. And I kept doing the students. I tend to have students, most of them are sort of North Shore, high affluent. So it is difficult to keep them motivated. They just have a lot of things in their life, very full schedules. So it's hard to really, for me to get that pedigree of super serious, chess is my life. But I make it, I'm a sort of, I guess my style is very similar to Searching for Bobby Fischer. You got to make them love the game, right? You got to bond with the kids. Sometimes I'm going there, we're talking about Minecraft or video games, whatever. I bond with the kids first, and they come to respect you. And then they're like, wow, if he likes chess, it must really be good. And I get this bond. So I have really good relationships with my students. And it is hard to develop really top. And I get some kids to the expert level, but they just have so much in life. They have, piano after me and horseback ride and this and that. And they don't have the time to work a lot on their own. But I still love teaching them. And a lot of them become quite good players.
I think that's really impressive what you said about teaching them to love the game, because I think there's so many teachers out there, not just chess teachers, they're so concerned about the content that they're forgetting that motivation is a part of it. And you could know the content inside out, but if the student's not motivated to learn, so the fact that you said you develop a bond with them first, I just think that's so important. And you're developing a love of the game, because I think a lot of teachers may miss that aspect of it.
Yeah, no, just like when he was playing Monopoly, Bruce Pandolfini, I think, or something like that. Same exact thing. The parents are like, whoa, it's like you got to develop the bond, and then it will come. And sometimes it's a couple sessions. Sometimes I'll go outside, throw a ball with the kid. You have to bond with the student, and then it comes, and they will start to really appreciate the game. Once they appreciate the game, you're in good shape. They're going to have a lifelong. I mean, a lot of these kids keep playing. I have kids that they're in their 30s and stuff. They'll reach out to me. They're still playing all the time. They play in tournaments. So that's always very satisfying. And I got mad, actually. They got mad at me for school because, I have to write comments. You have to write comments for all the kids. And I put this comment in, about chess. I said, look, chess is one of these disciplines that stays with you your whole life, which is not something you can say for most subjects. And I said, you got to take that acid. But it's true. The things I teach in chemistry may reach a few kids, but 90% will no longer take a chemistry class. But chess, if you acquire these chess skills, you will have them well after you know me. So I have these kids 20 years later, still active players, stays with you. So it's a nice skill. And I think the parents really appreciate that.
I want to touch on something I think a lot of the listeners will be interested to hear your thoughts about. I want to talk about talent versus hard work. How much of it is natural talent? How much of it is hard work? Why some players get better quicker than others? Why some seem to never really get much better and plateaus? So I was hoping you could elaborate on that at length.
Yeah, this is what I've pondered quite a bit. This is not an easy one. I wonder that myself. I see players that were good players. In some cases, I eclipsed them quickly, and I don't know why. I don't think these people seem as talented as me on any front or more talented. And it's hard to quantify what's different. I remember one time this student, it's a friend of mine. He was like a 2100. I was like an 1800. And I moved up past him. And then before you know, I was a 2300. And we played each other. And I won the game. And he played really well. And it was a tough game. And it was sort of in one of these moments I had like an epiphany. I was talking about the game, and he was buzzing through all these lines, moving pieces around left and right. And he clearly saw a lot. And I just said, look, I played this move, and it was a really good move. I said, it just looked right. It felt right. And he got very annoyed. He's like, what is this look right, feel right crap? Sorry about that. What do you mean? And there is something about like an intuition, I suspect players have. I think with chess, though, it favors consistency. Most things, consistency is overrated. If you're playing basketball, you make a bad shot, but you make 50 good shots. It doesn't matter, right? Made 50 great shots, you're going to win the game. But chess, it's super critical to be consistent. It favors consistent, not brilliancy. If you hang in there and keep playing reasonable moves, it's likely your opponent will make an error. So I think consistency is really underrated. You really have to be consistent. When I play the top players, play GMs, I don't feel like they hit me with these crazy shots, but they just grind me. They just hang in there for so long and they like break me. Eventually I can't stay with them. So there's a consistency aspect I think that you need to have in your personality. And I think you need to play, like, I noticed when I got better, I stopped looking at my moves. So a lot of times when my opponent moves, I don't even consider my options. I'm asking why the guy's doing it. If I was him, what would I do? And I'll spend a few minutes in sort of this null move approach, looking at what my opponent does. And only then do I come to realize, okay, he's clearly going to do this, this, and this. Now let's look at my candidates to counter that. So I think you got to spend time looking at your opponents. Too many people play, I call it meat chess to my students. I can do this, I can do that. Wow, this move looks so good. But they got to look at your opponent's moves. People don't want to do that. So it almost feels like I want to look at what I can do, not what my opponent could do. And it kind of reminds me of, I'm a big Elon guy. It reminds me of his, he has this approach. It's called reasoning from first principles. And sort of the idea is that, you break the position down at the fundamental things. You don't, as opposed to by analogy, which is a lot of opening and stuff, right? You're looking at other people. You break down complicated positions into basic elements, and then you can kind of put it together and solve it. You solve the problem that way. In science and stuff, the reasoning from first principles, you take the basic axioms of life, law of conservation of nature and conservation of mass, conservation of energy. And you work from these back to, improve technology and other things. So I kind of think that consistency, you got to be consistent as a player and you got to hang in there. I find when I play players too, you can play like a 1600 and he'll play like 30 great moves. They don't just roll over often, but eventually they make some really bad moves and you just need to be patient. Don't try to, just don't overlook anything. Play consistent and your results will improve. And I find players that they play great moves like 80% of the time, 90% of the time, but just one move and it's all over in chess. You have to be consistent.
That's great. Now my jaw hurts because I was smiling so much while you were giving that talk because it's so true. So many things you said that I think bear repeating. First of all, players don't like playing defense or thinking about their opponent's moves. It's like you said, it's too much me chess. They just want to do what they want to do. And then the second thing is just about consistency and sort of grinding your opponent. Now, let me just ask you something. There are people, they have thoughts about, you should play more of an attacking game as opposed to a positional game. Like instead of the grind, you should, but it seems to me, and I'm wondering if you agree, you kind of have to go with your personality and what you're comfortable with. And also the position itself. In other words, if you're comfortable with slow positional games, let's say, I don't think you can consciously say, you know what, I want to start being an attacking player, because you have to be comfortable with that type of style. Or does it go by the individual positions, or is it a little bit of both? Like for me, I definitely am more of a positional player. I kind of like the slow grind and playing for small advantages. If I try to go into sort of a wild tactical battle, I'm not comfortable with that. And so for me to make the choice to do that, do you agree that that's part of it, or do you not agree?
I think that definitely people have styles, and you have to teach them openings consistent with their style. Sometimes it's hard to figure out someone's style, but yeah, if I have a student who just plays for the initiative, and until they get to a certain level of competence, you can't really teach a lot of small ball. Like I can't teach a kid how to grind an extra pawn. I have to, especially if they're very tactical in nature. So yeah, I try to teach them openings that suit their style. And I watch their games and see how they play. Some people aren't very solid players. That's great. Then you teach them solid openings. I don't think you can force them. At the top level, you have to play all types of chess. You just can't always play. The position will dictate at the very highest levels how you have to play. But no, I agree. I think styling is important. And most people are very aggressive. Like I found for me, when I was starting out, I was always an initiative guy. Initiative, always sacking the exchange, this and that. Then I got strong enough that I had to learn how to just grind, went upon a grind. So I didn't learn how to become sort of a solid player until I was a strong master. I was always just, I have a winning position and I wouldn't simplify, I keep going for the initiative. And it took me a long time to learn how to play small ball, as I call it.
Right. Now, do you think the modern age with blitz and online chess and puzzle rush and all these things, that's pretty much encouraging that sort of aggressive tactical style as opposed to a slower squeeze?
It probably encourages impulsivity, right? Everything is so fast paced online that it does sort of create like a rhythm in your games. And if you don't have a lot of tournaments, so yeah, I'm sort of one of these all chess is good chess within reason. But the problem is all that stuff. I mean, the biggest problem with my students is they just rush their moves. They see an idea, they want to make it, they get excited, they can't check and be thorough. Can't sit on their hands. So I think a lot of the problem is it creates, impulsivity issues, myself included.
Now, do you discourage speed chess from your students, or do you tell them to just limit it or not do it at all?
I mean, I prefer what I really like is like, I have some kids, it's like, guys, you can play as much speed chess as you want, but I need 1 or 2 slow games so we get together. We could look at it and see what you did wrong. If you're just playing endless blitz, you're going to blame every mistake you on time pressure. So I asked them to play 1 or 2 slow games. I don't want to kill I want them to play chess and love the game. And if it takes puzzle rush and these other things to keep them interested, fine. But try to give me a slow game once a week. That's what I like. 1 slow game online, at least game 30, game 6. Sometimes hard to get opponents online at these slower time because everybody's into the fast stuff.
Before we go back to some things about improvement, maybe you could tell us, you touched on it briefly, I'm kind of hoping for like the longer version now, how you made it to FM, Fide Master.
I may have learned chess from my father when I was younger. I don't know. I don't remember, but I relearned it in high school. I went to St. John the Baptist. And I think that summer it rained a lot. So we were just forced inside and I started playing chess. I had a neighbor who was he was arrogant. They owned a reading center and they just always were correcting my grammar. And they were nice people, but there was this air of like, they're better than me and everything. So I went and bought a chess book called Chess in a Nutshell by Fred Reinfeldt. I think Chess in a Nutshell. I liked everything about it except notation. I was like, oh God, what is this notation? I just want to see diagrams and prose. Eventually I learned and it helped because I went back and played this kid. And, I'd play him and just the subtle stuff. Like he would say, oh, I play so great with the queens off. Thank you very much. All these little digs. So I finally started to beat him. The positive reinforcement of beating these sort of intellectual powerhouses at something like that inspired me to go to a club. I met some other people that really did a good job of motivating me. And then I started playing for the high school team at St. John the Baptist. And that's when it took off. Now it's hard to find opponents. My mom would take me, I'd buy the latest chess computer at Your Move, Chess and Games. But they were weak back then. They were like 1700. But it was good. I would, compared to the ones now, they weren't, these master level things. And I would play the computers. And then I think I started to really get good in the 80s. I was at Stony Brook and I started to play Jonathan Schroer. He went to this school and I was only a 1900 and he was an international master. And he really didn't want to teach me. He just wanted to bash my head in. But I would let him bash my head in. I'd go to his house after college. He lived right in Stony Brook. And he would pound me in 2-minute games relentlessly. But I would, I'd learn a little bit each time. I'd go home and have dreams. We play for 6 hours. I'd go home and have like chess dreams, but I would improve because I would think of what I did wrong. I think one of the ways I got improved is every time I play a game, even if it's just a blitz game, it's always just a reflection. What happened there? And I'll take a little bit from each game, either an opening nuance, or I can't believe I gave him the file, whatever, this nuance that I'll pick up. I think that's one of my things that helps me is always try to figure out what went wrong or what went right. And I just got pounded by Jonathan Schroer. So I think I was a 1900. Was it a 1900? yeah, around there. But then I quickly moved up to master. I started playing some of the Nassau. Harold Stenzel ran some National Futurities, and I got to play a lot of the strong players. I got to play like Mark Ritter and Konstantin Dolgitzer, Sergey, Jay Bonin, and I started to play in these futurities where you knew who you were playing the week in advance, and you could prep for each other. And I think that's when I really started to take off. And I so I think I was a national master in '85, and I think I was like 20 years old. Then I became a senior master in '88. I was one summer where I really studied. I wasn't a big book study type, but one summer I just had no life. I got a copy of Zurich 53. Everyone kept telling me to buy this paperback version of this book. It didn't look particularly interesting, but I think it was Bronstein. And I did every game in the book, cover to cover. Didn't leave my room. My mother was like, "What's wrong with you?" And I spent one summer. I did every single game in that book, and maybe some other things. I think I did some other stuff, but I remember going. There was one book I went through every single, even if it was a 12-move draw or something, with some amazing games, and his commentary is very interesting. And there was one summer I worked really hard. I gave up my life for chess, and I improved a lot.
That's a lot of hard work. No, it's a pretty interesting story. Let me ask you about some tournament advice in general, like for students. So as far as playing in tournaments, and not so much the game itself, I mean, that's part of it, but when you're actually playing in a tournament, an over-the-board tournament, as opposed to playing like a kitchen table game, sort of what your greatest hits are as far as advice for your students.
As I alluded to before, you got to expect the battle. You can't expect a trap or a rollover. It's just most of the time you just have to be expected to sit down and battle for hours. You got to be tenacious. You got to be opportunistic, and you got to check your opponent's moves. I spend as much time looking at my opponent's plans as my own, really trying to figure out what they're going to do. Then you never caught off guard. You're really going to blunder if you look and see what they're going to do before you even contemplate your move. Obviously, you got to manage time. Got to use your time. I'm not a big fan of the psychology stuff. I know that's sort of a factor in the game.
Now, what do you mean by that? When you say you're not a fan of the psychology stuff?
Yeah, like the psychological nuances that you do to try to unnerve your opponent.
Is that still prevalent, you think? Because I don't see too much of that anymore. But you think there are still guys playing that game?
Well, I haven't played a tournament game in 25 years, so maybe maybe my info is dated. I do remember having sort of just making eye contact at certain moments and things like that. There was a lot of subtlety in psychology. I read a few books on it. I know I'm not a big fan of all that stuff, although I know it's there. Maybe it's no longer a thing. Maybe these days with the engines and everything, people just have ice in their veins and can't psych them out. I don't know. My students they're subject to psychological stuff sometimes. You teach them an opening, and then there's this psychological letdown when they don't fall for it or go into so there's almost a tendency not to teach very structured lines because there's a psychological letdown when your opponent plays something you didn't expect, and sometimes they try to punish it when it's not punishable, it's just a move. And so that's the double-edged sword of teaching sharp theory. Sometimes they'll get it, but the other thing is if you teach these sharp lines, they get some wins with traps, but are they a better player because they want some trappy lines? No, they gain rating points. The guy walked into some traps. So I don't mind it when they're young and trying to build their confidence a little bit, but I kind of don't like winning with traps and stuff because you're getting your ratings going up, but your play is not getting better.
Yeah, the long-term growth is not. It's a separate thing, right?
Yeah, they're just getting you're getting like a fake bump in their rating. I want them to just go and play chess, go and battle. You'll learn a lot more if you sit there and play for 4 hours. You're going to become a better player if you're sitting there grinding for hours in a chess position.
Now, do you agree that for each student, for each player, or for amateur players in general, because this is something that I've advocated, like if I'm speaking to a beginner, that you should play the same openings? In other words, against E4, you have your opening and that's what you play. Like for me, against E4, I'm playing the French defense and I'm sticking to it. I'm not going to start trying E5 or C5. As white, I play the London system only. I know you may criticize that. Some people do. But even if I play E4 as white, like, do you agree that as an amateur player, you should have the same openings and stick to those?
Yeah, I think when you're starting out, and as you get better, you become, you could be, they can prep for you. But yeah, I believe definitely taking systems and learning them just to get that type of position that you feel comfortable with, I think is definitely important. It does, like, for instance, yeah, I know you play the French, and I've actually worked with students, and we've looked and said, all right, Neil plays this. He's going to play CD and Bishop D7 and Bishop B5. You got to be ready for this. And here's what the problem with, obviously the problem with dogmatic openings is you open yourself up to being prepped for. So that's the one side effect. You got to be careful. But yeah, I'm a big believer in that. And I have prep students. I have had people walk into, like, I remember one time Harold Stenzel was playing one of my students, and he played this really bad French line. And we prepped like 15 moves where he wins a piece. The guy, Harold's just going to lose a piece if he plays this line. And he played it, every time. Sure enough, we get the exact line, guy goes right into it. And I was at the club at the time, and I walked away, and Harold looked around the room like he knew something was up. And then he continued to play, and he's down a piece 2 moves later, all prepped in advance. So it is, you got to be careful. I know you have the unique pairing, so your club's relatively safe. But obviously at the high level where you're playing, it is tough. You like the surprise value and not be prepped for it. It is an uncomfortable feeling.
The main reason I use the random pairings variation, it's not so much that it avoids prep. It's just that at a local club, when you generally have the same crew of guys, if you don't use random pairings, if you use a standard Swiss, every tournament's going to look the same.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. If you're getting the same guy, yeah.
And before I went into random pairings, I had people say that to me. It's like, Neil, how come, every time I play this guy in round one, and that's part of the reason I do it. I think at the club level, it's an effective system. Like for the major tournaments where there's so many entrants, probably not so much. And then what you said about like someone in my situation where I play the same openings, everybody and his brother knows what openings I play, but the trade-off is that I know how to handle them and I'm comfortable. And generally speaking, unless I have like a bad night and just make some freak blunder because I'm distracted, I get a playable middle game. So my thinking is I'd rather take a middle game where I know I'm going to be equal, better, or slightly better, where I get a playable middle game, but maybe my opponent prepped for it and he's okay. But I would rather have that, my opponent prep for an opening he knows I'm going to play, but I'm comfortable in the middle game, than mix it up, but then I'm not comfortable and I might blunder.
Well, you play very safe stuff. Like, yeah, so French defense, and you really can't prep against the London system. You just can equalize probably reasonably comfortably. But there is no, yeah, you're right. You're not going to walk into some heavy prep if you play something like that. So yeah, it's more critical if you're playing sharp lines, very sharp systems. And by the way, I should put, you run a great club. Some of my kids are going there, students, and it's an excellent service you're providing to the community. Appreciate you running that club. It's a good club.
I appreciate you saying that. Those are very kind words. Thank you. We've been getting a lot of kids now, I think more than ever. I think kids in general, you're seeing them more than ever before. I know the major tournaments, which I don't really play in much anymore, like the CCA events, I just don't have time for that. But I try to, sort of get a feel for the temperature of those events. And I'm hearing it's like more kids than ever before. And even at the local clubs too, even at my club. And it's great to see. This is something I'm going to talk about in a future episode, but it bears, mentioning now from what you said. I just love the fact that kids are doing something productive away from a screen, that they're sitting there playing chess. It's a great game. They're not looking at an iPad. They're not playing Fortnite. And it's just great to see kids of this generation with all the technology that they're sitting down in an OTB game playing chess. I guess as an educator, it's just nice to see that.
Yeah, I agree. If I had an Xbox or something like that when I was my age, I probably would have never taken up chess. The stimulation you get from these game consoles, or I would have just, it's just too easy. I mean, chess is hard work, but it's very satisfying too. And if I had, so that's why, if I had those things, I would never become a chess player. It would, and to my, I would think, I know it would be bad. I wanted to become a chess player, and I just would have never got into it. So I really admire kids that take an interest in chess in the modern day with so many forms of stimulation. You could just sit and watch TikTok or whatever. I mean, to take up a game that demands a lot of concentration is impressive. So yeah, I see someone like that. It's very, they generally going to have an impressive skill set in terms of focus, concentration, and logic. Someone who takes that up. I agree. It is impressive. It is, that's one of those psychological things. It is tough sometimes to play a student. Like if you're sitting down and you're 50 years old and you're playing a 10-year-old kid, there's an odd psychology of like, I'm supposed to be I'm the wisdom. I've got 50 years of wisdom, and you're sitting down and you're playing some young child who's, you might assume is tactically very strong. And that is, in today's world, learning how to play children is an important part of the game. If you're playing in major events, you need to learn how to play children, the psychology of it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. This is going to be a good lead in to my next episode, because the thing is, a lot of adults, doesn't bother me at all. I think I'm like whatever, but some adults, like you said, they are uncomfortable, and some kids, not all, some, they'll squirm, they'll have trouble sitting still, they fidget a lot, and they also play really quickly, but yet they're right there in the game, which can be very unsettling. Like there's something about your opponent playing, if it's a slow time control, but he's playing like it's a 5-minute blitz game and he's right there in the game and you're taking your time, it can be very frustrating. And they tend to play fast. They do a lot of these tactical puzzles, but then it's also kind of like a lose-lose situation, because if you win, it's like, oh, gee, whoop-de-doo. I beat a 7-year-old kid and I'm 45. And then if you lose, it's like, oh my goodness, a 7-year-old just beat me. You want to cover your head and just, walk out of the tournament hall. But I agree with what you said 100%. It is a very, very interesting psychology that happens there.
Yeah, you just got to learn how to, it's just part of today's world. There's young students that are really, really good at it. They got these plasticity of their minds that can acquire tactics and other things quicker than someone who's older. And there is this sense of keeping the tempo. They move fast. The psychology, well, he moved fast, I got to keep the tempo of this. And you got to shrug that off and just breathe and realize, these fast moves are often going to be wrong moves. It's just going to come down to that sooner or later.
Do you agree with the popularity and sort of the standardization of time delay? Because I'm a big advocate of time delay. I think it has done a lot for the game. I think it makes the position on the board more important than the clock itself. Just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? I would have to deal with these games where like you had to keep factoring in that, I got to grind this out and I got 4 minutes with no increment, and he's just and you get people flagging you for just slime flags and things like that. So yeah, I think it is. I think the delay is very good. It improves the quality of the games, and it reduces sort of those slimy wins where you flag somebody and time pressure, even though you're losing stuff. So I like it. I'm a big fan of the increments, even though I have almost no experience with it. I have experience with it casually, play a little bit online and stuff, but I don't have experience in tournaments because my last game was like in 1996. I'm surprised, incredibly. I thought I was going to just take a couple of years off. You just ended up in the world of working all the time. I was putting in these massive weeks, and then
now, is that what it is like as far as you playing now in tournaments? It's just like it's just a little too much right now.
If I teach chess, I don't know. It's like you have to have this certain level of enthusiasm, even for basics. Like you have to get excited when the kid finds like a free piece. If you want to be a good chess teacher, you need almost this, call it false enthusiasm, but you need to keep this level of enthusiasm huge. I'm a big enthusiasm person when I teach anything, but it does pay its toll. All that enthusiasm in the day, you're kind of like a deflated balloon. And I'm impressed with these guys like Mark Ritter, who could teach chess all day and then go and play at night like it was nothing. I'm teaching how the knights move. I can't go play. Sodomy wants to sort of retire and go and try to play again and see, am I shot? Am I done after a 20-year hiatus? Realistically, I'm probably considerably weaker. I think my FIDE peak was 2,400. Am I at 2,300? I don't know. I don't really know. Some of the guys I do meet sometimes with Tony Renna and Tim Mirablet and stuff, we play sort of casually. They still think my game is okay. My guess is, as I saw in a John Watson interview, as you age, I don't think you lose the ability to calculate, analyze critically, reason, but you do fatigue. And probably in a 4-hour game, I can do 3. And that last hour, the errors will start to accumulate because I just don't have the fortitude to grind out these 4 or 5 hour games. So I think that's I'd be losing a lot of games in the deep hours of the game.
Right. I agree. It's more of an energy thing than a mental capacity thing. And when I spoke with Brian Caron, who he said something similar about his teaching schedule is just such that his brain would be like, for him to play, he just could. It's like you said, he just couldn't do it. And so he makes some choices, and if he felt he wasn't prepping and he was just teaching all day, that his performance just wouldn't be good.
Yeah, if I take a break from teaching, like sometimes on a spring break, all the kids go away, I do kind of feel it come back in my blood. So I don't think I'm totally I do feel sort of the urge to play. And it's fun to have, like I said, Tony Wren will come over. We'll have a couple of cold ones and we'll play chess and analyze. It's a fun session. And we go over the games and it's competitive and it's fun. No one's trying to, sometimes Tim will come. It is nice to have these off-hand sessions. I do find it gets me back in the groove. I want to start thinking about, problem is I teach kids. So kids openings are different. I'm teaching them prep for me is much, much different. I'm looking at if I ever tried to go back and play real chess, my openings are very bad. I've been teaching sort of just openings geared more towards sub 2000.
Let me jump in there. When you say openings for kids or openings for sub 2000, what are you teaching them?
Well, I might teach somebody, say, I have a students who might play, say, they play a version of the Sicilian, which is solid, right? It's like the 4 nights. I don't want to get too. So you played the 4 nights Sicilian. The lines are interesting and well balanced. But once you play good players, they're going to reach a position where they just have the 2 bishops. That's what they're going to get a 2 bishop open position, and it's going to be painful for me. So I can't. That'll work at the class levels. It'll work up to expert. But at the high level, you can't play any openings that have, any sort of suspicion to them. If they have some lines that lead to a solid pull, I'll end up defending those all the time. And sometimes they'll play some sharp gambits and stuff. Probably wouldn't hold up although I was teaching some kids the hanging shower gambit. I saw Magnus play it the other day, which is kind of wild. But probably wouldn't hold up at the high levels, especially if they knew it was coming.
Okay. Well, speaking of Magnus, he does play the London system.
Yeah, the London has gotten the London is definitely a viable opening for someone who doesn't want a lot of prep, just a stodgy middle game. Yeah, no, it's a frustrating opening for black players. It's not an opening. You used to want to see it, and now you don't want to see it. It's kind of like, oh man, this is going to be hard, especially if you're playing a lower rated, because it's hard to generate winning chances sometimes.
Yeah, that's true. And it is I'm going to do an episode on the London because I play it, but it is becoming very controversial. But in my opinion, it's sort of a polarizing opening for kind of the wrong reasons, because I think there's just some bad information about it online out there. But I think when used, quote unquote correctly, I think it's a very solid choice for non-title players as white.
And there's some short variations. I saw one of I don't remember who it was Gotham, Levy Roseman, or somebody had there's some sharp lines. You can play some very sharp lines where you sack the B2 pawn or something and you play for initiative. It's an opening that I thought about teaching. It's funny, I used to teach this really lousy opening. It was D4, knight C3, bishop F4, right? The knight is misplaced there. And now I realize this is a whole system people play. I forget what it's called.
Oh, the Jabova?
Yeah, Jababa London or something. This was just a tricky opening I played for absolute beginners, just to get your pieces out. Maybe sometimes you go knight B5, they learn about forks and stuff. And if they didn't do it, you play these. And now it's a whole opening system. This was nothing when I first started teaching it.
Yeah, Jabova, I think it's I'm doing this without a board in front of me. It's after D4, white goes, bishop F4, knight C3.
Right, the knight goes to
and
C3.
The idea
London.
Yeah, if the knight, white plays this.
Yeah, white plays. So it's not really a London at all.
Yeah, so if he goes, I think the idea is if you go knight B5, you're attacking that C7 pawn, and that can be a tactical thing if the knight gets it. But it also works against a King's Indian setup, because when he does, when he does G6, having the white bishop on D3 is not really, doesn't make much sense. So you kind of line up the queen and the dark squared bishop on that diagonal so that you're hitting, what is it, H6?
Yeah, you hit an H6 with the battery, yeah.
It's the Jabava London. Simon Williams has some good videos on that.
Yeah, he's got some interesting eclectic openings that aren't quite cutting edge, but I think they're great for the tournament play. He's got some interesting stuff. I've seen him, I don't know where I saw him on something doing something, and he does have interesting, and it's funny, a lot of that stuff I always taught, like he teaches the hillbilly, and I throw in some of that stuff at some of my students.
Yeah, and I like looking at his videos because he's a very aggressive player, and I tend not to be, but I'll look at some of his lines. Like I played one night at the club, it was a London where, you get your knight on E5, you don't castle as white, and you get in H4, and you attack against the castled king, which is very unlike how I would normally play. But I had a couple of games at the club where I had a nice straightforward attack and won pretty handily. And it kind of blew my mind because I normally play it much more stodgy and kind of a slow buildup. But it's like you said, the London can be extremely aggressive, because the idea that, the London system is boring. The London system always has the same positions. Not really.
Yeah, no, it's definitely gained a lot of credibility. You shouldn't have any need to defend that opening. It's a very viable, solid opening to play. The funny thing is, I was talking to Tony Renna, who read this book on Alpha Zero, and essentially Alpha Zero will always play to stop Black's move E5. E5 is so strong, according to Alpha Zero, that White should either play knight F3 or D4. He shouldn't play E4 because Black gets to play E5 and equalize. So it's amazing how the theory is evolving, and Alpha Zero essentially plays knight F3 or D4 and does not let Black play E5, which is amazing to think that it thinks that move is so strong for Black that it only considers two first moves.
Yeah, no, very cool. I appreciate it. So Roger, we're kind of getting to a close here as far as time. I just want to thank you for being a part of the podcast. You offered some great insight for amateur players, for tournament chess. Really appreciate it. You also brought up some great things I'm actually going to talk about in future episodes. So this is going to actually be a great lead-in. I really appreciate it. FM Roger LaFlair, thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you at home, as always, I hope you win your next game. Have a great day.